I'm not going to get away discussing the Lord of the Rings without discussing sex and race, and let's throw in class too. I'd love to not do that. Um, some of you, but it needs to be said. Some of you might feel that there's not a lot of room for you in this book, or that there's a kind of implied politics here that isn't super friendly to you. You are totally welcome to feel that way. And making this video means that, like, various fairly random people are going to come by on YouTube and try to comment to defend Tolkien's honor and argue how he's not really that bad. He was progressive on race and this and that. Fine. Let's accept that it's okay to say sometimes that sometimes Grandpa has bad politics. This book was published in 1954. It was written over 17 years before that. As a person of the 30s, 40s, it was written in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And we can stipulate, without embarrassment or impugning Tolkien's character, that he was fairly conservative even for the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Is he the hardest line person? No. Did he hate the Nazis? Yes, he hated the Nazis. When the Nazis wrote to him about The Hobbit and said, "We're going to translate this German, first ensure us you're not Jewish," did he tell them to F off in a nice, polite, Donish, British way? Sure, he did. But is he still from 1954 and the 17 previous years? He is still someone who was born in the 19th century, is part of the British class system. He doesn't have he doesn't have the same politics that most of us would have. That's okay. I'll say two things. One, I do my primary work, my research work on English Renaissance literature. People from the 16th and 17th centuries. Some of those people would hate me. I have grown comfortable with the fact that people from earlier generations don't see the world the way I do, just as future generations, like yours, won't see the world the way I do. I am also comfortable with the fact that people who make very, very good art are not right about everything, that they sometimes have silly or even odious ideas. If you doubt this, I invite you to go down to East Ninth Street and make a pilgrimage to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where you will find tributes to sublime works of musical art made by extremely flawed people in many cases. Yes? Ah, sometimes you just want to buy the album and not meet them. And I don't want it's Tolkien is himself. He has his own beliefs, which are not the same as all of his readers. But generations of readers have found both that they don't agree with his vision of the world around us, his vision of how race, class, ethnic identity, gender identity work or should work, his values in those spheres, and the incredible richness of this novel. The novel is too important to leave aside, even if there are things about Tolkien that later writers don't work. Down the second half of the course, we will see a number of writers doing different things with the fantasy space. Look, Le Guin is culture bound, writing a Wizard of Earthsea in 1968, and changes radically or liberally over the decades after that. Doesn't do, Tolkien's ideas about women and people of color do not change much. And he's also kind of done publishing after 1954 in his lifetime. The rest of the publication is very much posthumous. Okay, I want to say he is fairly conservative even for his time. Let me talk through a few things. There's also the case he's working with archaic material, pre-modern material that does have a class system, that has hereditary warrior nobility, that has men in all the positions of power, that doesn't have a lot of space for women. That is true. In terms of gender, and you'll see actually every time someone adapts the movie, adapts this into a book, this book into a movie, there's a great pressure to try to like make more palatable female characters. Tolkien doesn't feel that pressure. Not in his defense, I will point out that sometimes his fantasies go beyond what actually happened in the Middle Ages. So Aragorn, son of Arathorn, is descended from Isildur by a father-son chain, like dozens of them in a row, without a woman being involved in there. No one's the grandson of a previous chieftain. It's father to son, father to son forever. Trust me, the royal families of Europe, certainly the English royal family, didn't manage that. Certainly not the timescale we're talking about. Tolkien believes heavily in hereditary facility. And I'm going to talk about how weird this is, including the class system. So he believes in the great argument, which is ongoing, but which we have some research progress on, between how much of what we do, what we're like, is inherent, is biological, is hereditary. We would say in our DNA. Tolkien would probably say in our blood. DNA hadn't been discovered yet. He'd say in our blood. Tolkien leans very, very heavily on things that we might otherwise view as coming from culture, coming from nature. Is something inherited, or is it something learned from the environment you're in by education? Tolkien imagines his various magical races as kind of subspecies who have inherent biological aptitudes for things that really are probably cultural. Oh, you're born knowing how to shoot a bow well. No one's born knowing how to shoot a bow well. Some people grow up practicing with the bow a lot. Some people learn woodcraft. This extends, if you read some of the prologue to the Fellowship of the Ring, you will see in my mind, unfortunate moment where Tolkien has to like go into this pseudoscientific pedantry about the three different breeds, subspecies of hobbits, and how like some of them are more naturally prone to be handicraft workers, smiths and whatever, like Tolkien's own ancestors, and how some, the Fallowhides, are kind of the natural aristocratic leaders who like hunting more than making horseshoes. And fine. He also believes here, if you believe in race is inherent, well, you believe in racial things as racially inherited, then you also believe that might be inherited through family lines, like the class system. And here, Tolkien replicates some of the English class system, even though he has to know better. He has to know better because he both went to and taught at Oxford University. Before World War II, he went before World War One, and at the beginning of World War One, he began teaching before World War II. He went to Oxford University when it made that place, like Cambridge University and like some of the elite universities, like all the elite universities in the United States, made much more space than they currently do for children, sons of inherited privilege who weren't particularly good students. Tolkien went to university with and then taught students who were the wealthy, well pedigreed, terrible students who I'm not saying those no longer exist. There are a much smaller percentage of the class now. Do you think that's true of the Ivy Leagues? Believe me, before World War II, those institutions were nothing. Were a lot of space for terrible, for for rich boys who weren't all terribly interested or good at studying. Okay, Tolkien knows that, but he's still going to go with the class system. Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that, Ronnie? I don't know. I don't know. I want to point out how far along Tolkien believes in the biological innateness of things that are actually learned and cultural, because he very specifically believes and has put in writing his belief that learning languages, being able to learn dead languages, is biologically inherited. This is not true. This has been this is a weird belief even at the time. It has been disproven by generations of scientific research since, and it's also uh, obviously not true when you think about it. So Tolkien, even the great among us, silly, other great writers believe weird stuff. William Butler Yeats was one of the greatest poets alive before World War II. He's the greatest Irish poet of his generation. He believes him. He believed that he lived in a haunted house and the ghost was his friend. Tolkien believed that, like, if you encountered a dead language that your ancestors had spoken, you would learn it very quickly. That he had, in fact, learned like Midland West Saxons intuitively as a known language just because he had those ancestors. That is, that's super not true, right? Um, let me say, everybody has to learn dead languages the same way, and you don't actually get any help. Okay, let me use a couple examples from the world around us. Irish Americans, people who have a lot or who have between 50 and 100% Irish DNA, but grew up speaking English, are not better at learning Irish Gaelic than anybody else. It is actually very hard for them. If you have a little Italian DNA and a lot of Irish DNA, ask me how I know, Italian will still be easier to learn because there is no biological link to particular languages once your family has stopped speaking them. Now, if you're Irish American, you might be more motivated to learn Gaelic. You might have more opportunities. You might stick to it harder because you want to, and motivation is important. But it's a very difficult language for English speakers. Italian is easier for English speakers to learn. Doesn't matter how much biology you have. Also, if you're 100% Italian American, you aren't going to be born knowing how to speak Italian. You actually have to learn it like everybody else. If you're if you're living in Ohio but you're entirely Irish, you can't speak Gaelic and you can't quickly learn Gaelic any more than you can just automatically play the bagpipes. Do you have certain inborn genetic traits if you're Irish? Yes, for the love of God, put on sunscreen now. But language isn't one of them. Language is always proved is cultural, not biological. You you learn it from people around you, right? Same way there's no particular gene for chess, right? There's no particular gene for uh being good at gardening. Okay? Like these are things you have to be taught. Tolkien believes you have an inborn response to language. In fact, like I'll put the cards on the table. Since I teach Shakespeare and his earlier version of English, people are not faster at learning at that if they have a lot of English DNA. I don't have much DNA. I have very little English DNA. Uh, Through practice, I can read Shakespeare. People whose ancestors were not from England pick it up just as fast as people whose ancestors were. Here's how this plays out. Tolkien is actually putting words from Old English, from Anglo-Saxon, into the books as proper names or as nouns. Words like Theoden, Arkenstone is Arkenstone, right? He believes that readers will naturally respond to those words because they will have some kind of, pardon the phrase, race memory of them. This doesn't seem to be true. It does seem that Tolkien has a very, very good ear for language, as well he might, and he picks words that sound good, that have a ring in their ear. Is like, do do people whose ancestors were early English pre-Norman clansmen respond to these words more than anybody else? No, no. Tolkien's just tripping.